Usually you see natural selection happening in a certain direction. This is the normal type of selection. So this shows the distribution. These bell curves show the distribution of certain type of flower they were studying over several generations. And as you can see, in early generations, the flowers are short, which means their height looks to be low here, 10 to 20 centimeters tall. And over successive generations, the flowers get taller and taller and end up 80, 90 centimeters. Perhaps they were doing an experiment here where they were only mating the tallest flowers of the group that they were growing. In other words, this could be artificial selection, like humans were trying to get taller flowers. Or this could be natural selection. Maybe the taller plants were favored. Maybe they get more sunlight. Anyway, if you ever see a bell curve moving in a particular direction, what's wrong?
They're not common.
Oh, you need to be.
Yeah, that would be kind of cool. Imagine being knocked up.
Hold on loosely.
It's the Chromebook, actually.
It's the Tesla. All right. Are you released?
Yes, sir. Never done it.
Okay. Back to this. If you ever see a bell curve distribution moving in a certain direction, we call that directional selection. And that is natural selection. It changes over time. It's one of the violations of the Hardy-Weinberg equation. If these numbers, they might show it not by a bell curve moving, but they might show it by numbers changing. If this is 0.3, 0.7, and the next generation is 0.4, 0.6, and the next generation is 0.5, 0.5, the next generation is 0.6, 0.4, it's moving in a certain direction. That's directional selection. Now, this type of selection is called stabilizing. Here's the original population. It's a nice bell curve distribution. And what we see here is over time, the distribution becomes more average. And this is this example they're using are the number of clutch size is what they call it. The number of eggs laid by birds is always around a certain average number, and it doesn't vary much. I mean, what's the problem if you lay too many eggs if you're a bird? You can't feed all the babies. And so you get poor survival rates. None of them end up very big and strong. What's the problem if you lay too few eggs if you're a bird? Some of them are going to die. Just the cruelty of nature, right? Some of them die. A rat comes up there and eats one of the eggs. Another bird swoops in and crushes an egg. I don't know. Some eggs always die, so you need enough, but too many and none of the young will survive very well because they can't get enough food. So you need an average number to survive. And so most bird clutch sizes are very average, or around an average number. And you see, what you end up seeing is a bell curve that's not very wide. It's very thin and tall. So we call this stabilizing selection, when the bell curve gets thinner. We think that's happened with human birth weight, same way. Human birth weight is always around a pretty narrow margin. babies are always about the same weight when they're born. Of course, if a baby's too big, it can't fit out of the mother, and would not only kill the baby, but the mother. Well, now with modern medicine, we don't have that issue as much. But it used to be a really big deal. A lot of women died during childbirth. Yes?
Would they not eat a lot during pregnancy so they wouldn't have to die?
No, because that's the problem. Then you run into the problem with low birth weight.
Oh.
The baby won't survive because it's not strong enough.
That's terrifying.
Modern medicine has changed a lot of these rules. Oh, here's an example of a directional selection. These peppered moths. Remember, the peppered moths started out light colored. Did we go over the peppered moths in this class?
Yeah.
Like or
It's because of the factors, like in the wood, they were
Yeah.
in the top of the wood.
So the peppered moths look like this to start out with.
Here's the wood.
Then the factories released a lot of pollution, which killed the lichens on the trees, and the lichens were white, so the trees became dark, and all of a sudden the dark moths were favored. And so the bell curve distribution went from a lighter colored moth to a darker colored moth. You'll probably see something about peppered moths on the AP exam. That's a commonly studied organism. And that's an example of directional selection. What happened when they put pollution control in?
Switch back.
They went back. And when they made all the industry put in regulations to clean the pollution that they were emitting, we saw the moths switch back. This is called diversifying selection. So here's the original distribution of rabbits, and this rabbit wasn't favored very well and did poorly. If you're this color, you don't do well, but if you're dark, you do really well in some areas. And if you're, this is called Himalayan, and if you're Himalayan, you do really well in different areas. But the white one didn't do well. I guess it wasn't snowy wherever they were doing this study. So the original bell curve distribution looks like this, and it ends up where you have dark and Himalayan, but the original color is much less. This is like taking a species, and you end up, if this continues, and you could get two different species, perhaps, because of the division here. We call that diversifying selection. There's another word for it. It's called disruptive selection. You might hear it called disruptive selection. The one that you see most often in textbook are these British land snails. You had your dark land snails that did well in the woods. You had your light land snails that did well in the sand. But the medium land snails that weren't they're kind of medium colored, they didn't do well in either location. And so their numbers went down, and the dark ones and the light ones went up. What about negative frequency dependent selection? So when we say frequency dependent, that means the selection is dependent on the frequency. Sometimes you can figure these things out just by reading the words. When we say it's dependent on the frequency, we mean how many. The frequency is like how many there are. And these are a type of lizard. Let's see what it's called. I think I have the name of it. The yellow-throated the side-blotched lizard. The side-blotched lizard comes in three types: orange, blue, and this one's called yellow. Aren't they cute? Now, this is called negative frequency dependent selection. Y'all try and hang with me here. This is not easy to understand. Matt, are you with me? So the orange one is the biggest. And it does well mating with the females. So they're all competing to mate with these females. And the orange one will beat out the blue one because it's bigger. So if blue ones are in high numbers, the orange will take over because the orange ones can outcompete the blue ones because they're bigger. So let's say the orange ones get high number. Well, the yellow ones will actually be able to outcompete the orange ones. The yellow ones are the smallest, and they look like the females. So the orange one can't tell the yellow ones very well from the females. And the yellow ones will slide in and be able to secretly mate with the females without the orange ones running them off, because the orange one thinks it's a female. I don't know if these orange males try to mate with these yellow males. But anyway, what will end up happening is the yellow one, if the orange is dominant, there's a bunch of them out there, the yellow one will sneak in and mate with the females, and the number of yellows go up. And then if the yellow takes over, the blue one becomes favored, because blue beats yellow. And so, because the blue can recognize the yellow a lot better than the orange can. And the blue's bigger than the yellow, so the blues can fight off the yellows. And so if the yellows are high, the blues will come in and take over. And then if their numbers get high, the orange one comes in and takes over, because it can beat the blue. And if the orange gets high, the yellow one comes in and takes over. So you see the numbers of each variation going up and down over time. It's like rock, paper, scissors. Somebody was talking about that earlier. You know, rock beats paper. No, wait. Paper beats rock. Rock beats scissors. Scissors beat paper. And so they kind of take turns. So the reason we call it negative frequency dependent selection is because if you are high frequency, your numbers will go down. If orange is the most, it'll then go down, and yellow will take over. If yellow is the most, then it'll go down, and blue will take over. If blue is the most, then it'll go down, and orange will take over. And it just keeps cycling. Negative frequency dependent selection. Does that make sense? Josh, you get that? That's a tough one. Aren't they cute? There's a yellow one sneaking in there. Sneaking copulations. That means having sex. Sneaky sex. He looks kind of sneaky. Look at him. Sneaks in there and has sex. Now, let me describe the difference between that and positive frequency dependent selection. So when we say it's positive frequency dependent, that means the greater there is of the trait, the more it's favored. Unlike the lizards, where if their numbers were great, they weren't favored. In these, if the numbers are great, they become even more favored. And so, a good example of that is the color red in nature. Coral snakes have red bands. And they're very poisonous. They're some of the most poisonous snakes in the world. I don't know if they might be the most poisonous snakes in the world. You ever seen a coral snake? We got some around here. Don't mess with it. How about the king snake? They also have red. And animals won't mess with them because they know that red is dangerous. Maybe they got bit by a coral snake once and got really sick. They're not going to mess with that again. Or maybe they ate one of these butterflies. These are poisonous butterflies. And if you eat them, you'll get sick. And you won't eat them again. And they're red too. Now, this king snake isn't harmful, but it benefits off these other organisms that are red and are harmful. So nothing will really mess with the king snake because they have learned about the red color. You could say the same thing for yellow. Yellow jackets and bees and wasps, they all use this color yellow, and you don't usually mess with something that's yellow after you get stung by one of those things. So this is an example of positive frequency dependent selection. If the trait, which is red color, if you have that, you tend to do better, and your numbers will go up. And so it's positively frequency dependent. Make sense? So let's talk a little bit about sexual selection. Often a trait exists not because it helps you survive, but because it helps you mate. Think of the peacock's feathers. Look at that peacock there. If you were a peahen, which is the female, wouldn't you mate with him? He's got the best feathers. Look at that. So why would this peahen want to mate with this peacock with this huge display? Well, there's two kind of ideas here that are similar. The handicap principle is the idea that carrying all these giant tail feathers is kind of a handicap for you. If you got to drag around these giant tail feathers all day, and you're still alive, you must have good genes. You must not get sick much. You must be able to find food pretty well to eat, to grow all these big feathers. So scientists think that's kind of what is driving the females to choose these mates with the big features. So we call that the handicap principle. The female will want to mate with that male because he's probably got good genes if he carries that around. Of course, she's probably not thinking that, but that's what went into the evolutionary mechanism here. She's probably just attracted to big tail feathers. If you want to if you want to do it for humans, ladies, you might be attracted to guys that are bigger and stronger with big muscles. Is this true? I don't know. Girls, y'all have to tell me. But seems like guys that are bigger and more fit, you're more attracted to. Maybe that's because they could protect you better and protect your kids better. And maybe, gosh, if they're big and strong like that, they must be able to find food pretty well. They must not be sickly. And maybe that's why you're attracted to that. You might not be thinking about all that when you see a guy who's big, you're just attracted to it. It's built into your genes. So you guys have got to go work out. You don't have to. What about the good genes hypothesis? That's a similar thing. Being able to develop bright colors or large tails shows that the individual has good genes. There's a famous book called The Selfish Gene, written by a guy named Richard Dawkins, I think, who talks about how genes have a way of being passed down generation after generation. The best genes tend to survive over time. And that's what this good genes hypothesis comes from. If you're able to build this elaborate structure, you must have good genes. And you must be able to correctly make these proteins. You must have genes that will allow your survival. You must have genes that will allow you to get food. It's it's a similar idea to the handicap principle. But here's these ducks. They're very colorful. You know, you have to have good genes to be able to get feathers that are this colorful and to survive, eat, and grow. This is a spider with all these colorful stripes on them. And so we call that the good genes hypothesis. And it's all part of sexual selection. You want to mate with someone who has good genes. And if you see someone, if an organism sees another that doesn't look right, something's off with them, that's a signal that they don't have good genes. This is a cool study. Before we go into it, we're going to start doing some of these problems, these worksheets. Scientists scanned faces of thousands of people, and they put them in a computer. And the computer measured things like how far the eyes are apart, how high the eyes are, how tall the forehead is, where the ears were. The computer made hundreds of measurements of the faces. And then the computer averaged together all the measurements and produced a face with completely average measurements. And that was the most beautiful face when they showed this average face. Average eye size, average nose size, average mouth size, average lip size. Everything average, that's the most beautiful face to people. Isn't that interesting? If you got big ears or wide eyes or big nose or something, that's far from average, and people don't find that attractive. People find attractive the most average face. So if you see someone who's good looking, you can go tell them, gosh, you are so average. Isn't that interesting? So that's part of this good genes hypothesis. All right, you can stop filming.